fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them whose taxes you want to raise. Instead, who's they're going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now one of the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. Used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said, our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them? So they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as experiencing what we're experiencing now, the pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America is an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 for the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone, it's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to really matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world. China, Russia, India, European Union. I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. I had my attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity to raise the standard of living almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I propose tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussions with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe. Not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to our alliances. I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly, proportionally, to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have, without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a son serving in a war zone. Today we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who are not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, It's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. Make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they weren't. I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death.
Nonsense. Goodness gracious sakes alive. Calling every white American in the country racist. Shameful. Shameful. And shame on you. And shame on Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris.
Real justice.
Shame on you. Justice is throwing you out of office, buddy.
We have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America.
You can talk about racism. You're killing babies left and right by the millions.
Good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down.
$28 billion, $28 trillion in debt the nation is already with your giveaways.
Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over the past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly.
What about all the riots,
and
murderers, and racists in your Democratic run cities?
For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially
what about your
so brave, I want you to know your
crisis on the borders with millions of illegal immigrants?
Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now. Will close the boyfriend loophole. to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month.
And how many babies are killed by abortion that you support?
I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines.
Well, support the police then,
that can be fired
Joe.
in seconds.
Give us a break.
We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well.
God sits. Yeah, take the guns away from honest people, but the crooks will still have them, Joe. You have ever learned that lesson in life?
I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer wear Kevlar vests? They'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun, but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution.
Yes, you are, buddy. You're trying to. You're very deceptive about it.
I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it.
But look at your Democrats.
I kept my commitment to send a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it.
We
From
had it
11
with
million
President Trump,
undocumented folks,
and
the
you
vast
tore it
majority are
down.
here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger,
Yeah, they're all
hurricanes,
coming
earthquakes,
here,
natural disasters.
thanks to you.
When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration. And to help keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it.
Nonsense, buddy.
I'm restoring
That's a
the
lie.
program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take
And
care
she's
of
done
this.
nothing.
I
And
have
you have done
absolute
nothing.
confidence she'll get the job. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers. The young people have only known America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster. As well as a pathway to citizenship for farm workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. Let's act. And if we truly restore
You're the problem, Joe.
the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote.
All you want more voters coming in here will vote for Democrats, for liberals, for socialists.
More people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history. In the middle of the worst pandemic ever.
Yeah, it was a corrupt election.
Instead, it's
You
being
shouldn't
attacked.
be there. The
Congress should
oligarchists
pass H.R. 1 and
and
the
big
John Lewis
high-tech
Voting Rights Act in the Senate and
put you there.
right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost.
And lies were made. You should have had the National Guard in there if it wasn't for the two ladies sitting behind you, Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris. There would have been the National Guard and there wouldn't have been any quote-unquote rioting.
Endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage.
Too full of lies, Joe.
Sold to the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it.
When's Nancy going to tear up your speech?
We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver
Like she did to
for our
President
people.
Trump.
In our first 100 days together, we've actively restored people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of
Thanks to
thousands of
President
new jobs.
Donald Trump.
We're delivering real results to people
You've
who
got
can see it, feel
vaccines
it in their own lives.
to give out.
Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government.
We, the
You and
people,
I.
voted you out.
not some force in a distant capital, not
But
some
you,
powerful force that we
the
have no control
billionaires
over. It's
and the
us.
high tech
It's we, the people. In
controlled the
another era,
campaigns
when our democracy was tested,
to
Franklin
the
Roosevelt
elections.
reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part.
Do your part. And what about Hunter?
If we do that,
When are you going to straighten him out?
we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. So I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation. And I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because what's happening with the American people.
49 years in there, and what have you done, Joe?
Insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain.
49 years.
And we, the people,
Blame
did not
yourself.
flinch. The very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, reunited. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just. As
I
one
made
people,
one mistake,
one
voting
nation,
for you and
and
Obama
one
as the
America.
first election. And I've
Folks,
regretted it ever
I told
since.
every world leader I've ever met with over
And
the
I
years.
just pray
it's
that you
never,
get thrown
ever,
out of
ever been a
office
good bet
the
to
next
bet against
election.
America, and
I
it
hope
still
that the people
isn't.
take back
Through the
over
United States
the
of America,
Senate and the
there's not a
House
single thing, nothing
in
beyond our
2022.
capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
So boring I could hardly stay awake. The camera kept dropping.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, delivering his first address
49
to a joint
years
session
of
of Congress,
BS.
not called a State of the Union because it's so soon after the election. It was about an hour and 7 minutes long. It started about 9:06 Eastern Time. I think it's worth noting at the top just the feel of this room and the fact that he talked a lot in the beginning about COVID, about pulling through COVID and getting through this era that really marked so much of his candidacy.
Yeah, there's
and yet,
Maxine
you have
Waters
this new
with him.
CDC guidance that came out just this week, which said, and I'll read it to you.
She's the one
fully vaccinated
rooting for the
people
rioters,
can visit other fully vaccinated people
telling
indoors
them to
without
keep
wearing
fighting,
masks or social distancing.
breaking the
So
law.
you just have to ask yourself if this is setting an example, looking forward for the country, of what everyone can expect the country to be like in this period where people now
Come here, Queenie.
have
Come
very
here, Daddy.
open availability
Come
to
here.
vaccines. He went on to go through a lot of other issues. He talked about China. He talked about raising taxes on corporations, getting people to pay their fair share, and yet he also talked about whether or not those jobs would leave this country. He wants America first, I should say. Made in America, and talked about raising corporate taxes and raising taxes on the wealthiest people in the country as well.
President Biden speaking with Bernie Sanders there, senator from Vermont. The president spent a good deal of time talking about infrastructure, about jobs, saying lines like there's no reason
I
that
can't
blades
wait
for
to hear
wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. As you mentioned,
Tim
spent
Scott.
a decent amount of time on foreign policy, mentioned China numerous times, Russia. We didn't learn a ton, although we did learn that the president spoke with President Xi from China for 2 hours, his last conversation, and spoke at least a half dozen times over the past month. That seemed new. On Russia and other threats, he said, "I will defend America's interests across the board." Now, on one thing, Republicans may wish over the past 4 or 5 years that they have been talking more about the deficit and debt. because as these numbers start to add up, and you're doing the math about how this is all going to be paid for,
28 trillion already.
Line concern for that, but there wasn't concern from that, frankly, in the Trump administration, and that is one of the things we'll probably hear from Democrats as they move forward. Echoing FDR in the final parts of that speech, in which the president is clearly going for a big push to do big things in a short amount of time, considering the political timetable he's dealing with. Let's bring in our panel, senior political analyst Britt Hume.
We also have Chris Wallace with us, host of Fox News Sunday, and Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com. So let's go to Britt Hume and get your thoughts, Britt. Obviously, these sort of speeches are always a laundry list. I don't think there were a lot of surprises in there. Some of the things that might have fallen into the surprise category would be a genuine call for the unity that he spoke so much about in his inaugural address. For example, there were a couple of items
done
where
nothing
he said
to unify
reform,
people.
things along those
Zilch.
lines that he thought he could work, immigration.
Call every
there were some
white
things that
person
could
in
be
the
agreed
nation
on.
a
What stood out
racist.
to you, Brett?
Well, what stood out to me was I've covered about 45 of these by my count, and I felt about this one the same way I felt about nearly all the rest of them. But the best thing about it is that it's over. These speeches tend to be long and programmatic, and you have to go.
That's
to go
right.
through every
Thank
program
God
that
it's
you're
over.
proposing, or that some
Kept
agency has gotten
dropping.
I proposing or whatever.
Kept falling off to
It's
sleep.
never very fun to listen to, no matter who's given the speech, and this was no exception. As for this question of unity, it would have been a grace note that the old Joe Biden I used to know when I covered the Senate would certainly have mentioned the fact that Donald Trump is the guy that believed that we could, on an accelerated basis, produce a vaccine in unheard of a brief period of time.
That's right.
The new Joe Biden, the one that we have now as president, didn't do that, and I'm not surprised he did.
Chris Wallace, senator for 36 years, Joe Biden was. Vice president for 8. He's sat up there at the rostrum.
And I voted for him with Barack Obama on their
with the facial
first
recognition of what he was saying.
campaign.
He's been through arguably
Terrible
more of these
mistake.
speeches than
Believe me.
many in that building.
I wish
and
I'd
tonight
never
he
done
was
it.
the spotlight.
The nation has been downhill ever since, except for the time when Trump came in and turned things around and had things working out and dealing with our other countries with statesmanship, but with America first.
Child care to community health centers, all kinds of stuff, community colleges. And the other thing that's pretty popular is he said, you're not going to have to pay for it. Big corporations are going to pay for it. People making more than $400,000 are going to pay for it, but the vast majority of people watching tonight aren't. So offering a lot of stuff and saying you aren't going to have to pay for it is pretty popular.
There is no such thing as a free lunch, Chris.
After COVID, that people have come to have a different feeling about government, that they now feel more trusting and more the need
Chris,
of government. And
you're an
so
ultra-liberal
a
yourself.
lot of people often probably still will. That they believe the majority of people are going to say,
And you're an anti-Trumper.
here and they're here to help you.
Yeah, Katie, that's clearly the theme. This is a bigger government theme, and it talked about basically taking care of people from preschool through college. He didn't get into the elder care idea all that much, but we know that's part of the plan as well. What'd you hear in this tonight?
Well, first I want to talk about what I'm seeing, and Martha, you mentioned these people who are all vaccinated being indoors, socially distancing with their masks on. That's against CDC guidance, and it's not just that that's theater. It actually shows that the United States is at a weak point when the Congress can't show up in full to show that the United States is standing strong after coming out of a pandemic that was caused by China. I mean, if you give a joint address to a Congress that is not even half full, does it really even count as a joint address to Congress? I mean, I think that's really a question. The other thing that I heard is at the end of his speech, he talked a lot about democracy and protecting democracy, but Is it really democracy if you have Joe Biden and Democrats rushing through trillion-dollar bills without a single Republican vote in a Senate that is split 50-50? And then on the tax increase question, the White House still tries to sell this as if only rich people and corporations are going to pay for it. But when you get into the details of paying for this, and people, yes, they like to hear about more child care. They like to hear about government programs that are going to benefit them, that they, quote, don't have to pay for. But when you find out that you have to pay for it through the death tax and losing your family farm, you change your mind. When you find out inflation is going up and it's more expensive for you to pay for things, you change your mind. So there's a long way to go when it comes to this being supported, when people have to find out that even if they don't
Absolutely.
make $400,000 a year,
Well,
they
that's
will be
all,
paying
folks.
for
I
this
hope
one
Tim
way or
Scott
another.
gets on here, and I'll try to record him.
Talking to President Biden there, you see Jim Clyburn, obviously an early supporter from South Carolina, one of the people that got